As we all have noticed over the past couple of years, the world has gotten more and more complex. Wouldn't you agree? Our identities have become more complex, and our everyday lives have become more politicized than ever. And although we often come together in places in the city, that's where we come together, cities now are rapidly gentrifying, and they're becoming more and more homogenic in their makeup, and at the same time, more universal in their design. So, how can architects, myself included, take into account the realities and the complexities of everyday life? Over the past few years, these complexities have inspired me to take an intersectional feminist approach to my work as an architect. It has been one of the most significant shifts in my work. And I truly believe that there is a lens that we can all use to view the built environment and the spaces around us. If you hear intersectional feminism, of course, you think, yeah, okay, intersectional feminism and architecture, what do these two have to do with each other? I mean, I had the same first impression. So let me start by taking you on the journey that I took. About 8 years ago, I was asked to speak at a conference on female architecture. At first, I thought, female architecture? Is there even such a thing as female architecture? This led me to explore feminism and architecture. I had not even considered the two go together. And yes, I am a female, and yes, I'm also an architect. And I know that there are not a lot of women in the profession. We actually start out 50-50 in architecture school, and then around 10 years later, 10 to 20% of women remain. And even fewer go on to have senior positions or to even have their own office. I hadn't really considered any of this up until this point. But, of course, I wanted to give this amazing talk, so I totally dove into this subject. One of the first hits I got when I was Googling on female architecture was this building in Australia, this high-rise. And the architects who built it said they were inspired by Beyoncé's curves when they built it. I mean, really, her body, Beyoncé, of course Beyoncé is amazing, but to translate her body literally into a building, is that female architecture? This was the opening of a rabbit hole. And I discovered so many women who had been doing amazing things throughout the centuries. But I had never heard of them. I had never been taught about them in architecture school. And just the sheer number of women in architecture who had been ignored and or erased from history was just mind-boggling to me. But the rabbit hole led me to intersectional feminism. And I can imagine that some of you watching tonight know what intersectional feminism actually is, but also that there are a lot of people who might not know, who, like me, know the word or heard about it. Kimberly Crenshaw, an American law professor, she coined the term in the 80s. And basically, she explained intersectional feminism as a lens for seeing the way in which various forms of inequality operate together. So a person's political or social identity creates different modes of, privilege or discrimination. As for instance, your gender, your sex, your race, class, the list goes on. You don't have to be a woman or even someone who has experienced inequality to go by the principles that intersectional feminism gives us. This brings me to the heart of what I would like to talk to you about today. Architecture has not been applying principles of intersectionality up to this point. And it is crucial and critical that we do so. Why? Because public spaces need to be a reflection of all its residents. And up until very recently, they have not been at all. Architecture is the built variant of culture, and it often represents national identity. And the most direct example of this are public spaces. So the general idea of public space is that it's open and accessible to everybody, regardless of race, gender, age, ability. But the actual reality is that public space is not the ideal of freedom of expression and freedom of assembly. It's not a given for all, and definitely not for people who are not seen as normative. Most public spaces are built through a lens of mostly white, older, privileged men. And we have some wonderful public spaces, of course, but they have not been built with the experiences and the voices of many marginalized groups in our society. This is grounded in the way we are trained as architects. We have been trained to design in this tradition of kind of universality, you know, this universal Vitruvius man who stands like this, and maybe at best for this middle-class family, white family. So going forward, it's essential that we understand the people, the communities, the complex identities, and all of these underground cultures that we're building for. To do so, first thing is to look at your own privileged individual position as a designer, and to go beyond what you were taught. I'd like to share some examples of my work after this very long introduction to show you what intersectional feminism can bring to architecture. Here, this is the Kruiskade in Rotterdam. It's really one of the most multicultural streets in one of the most multicultural cities in the Netherlands. This street has inspired me to imagine buildings that were directly inspired by the very people, the very local cultures that were on this street. And after immersing myself for over a year in this street, I designed this high-rise building that really celebrated the people, the communities of that street. The Kruiskade is a place where the whole world comes to do their shopping, but it's also a world that is not known by architects and planners. And if they do know, it's kind of in a negative context where sometimes something has to be done to make it better or cleaner or more gentrified. This building was a drive-in high street with public spaces overlooking the center of Rotterdam. And the building showed me what it could look like when design from real people and real life is at the core of your design practice. In the last 2 years, together with different groups of women, I've been developing this summer pavilion in Stockholm, or near Stockholm. And I wanted to take the needs and the wishes and the dreams of women in this city as a starting point to create this public space. What amazed me was that many of the women, especially of the younger women, were very, very conscious that men were designing the spaces that they were supposed to enjoy. As for instance, the community center or the playground. And that in doing so, assumptions were being made about what these women would like or would not like or should like. This video gives you a quick glance of the summer pavilion. The summer pavilion is set to be built in the spring of 2021. And the people inside have all been body scanned and 3D body scanned, and are actual people who live in this city. This is an exhibition space I designed for the Dutch Pavilion in the Venice Biennale. I designed the space for Jacqueline de Jong. She's a Dutch female artist who was the only female member of the Situationist International, a very famous group of avant-garde artists. In her 80s now, she is finally celebrated, but she was almost written out of history. And my aim was not to show her work in this very wide and rational space, designed by Rietveld, but also to make her presence felt, to make it wild and amazing. For me, personally, working on the boundary of art and architecture is where I found the freedom to explore new form languages and to see what kind of beauty I could formulate outside of the standard beauty that is formulated by dead architects like Le Corbusier. And also to question what beauty really is. And also, what is culture? What is culture in spatial form? What can it look like when we take complex identities as a starting point? Once again, architecture is a cultural practice, and it is central to our imagination and our concrete relationship to space. And this is why we need to understand intersectionality as we build, because otherwise we will be trying to solve 21st century problems with 21st century tools.